Okay, hello and welcome to MSDynamicsWorld.com's Fall 2013 webcast series on managing your Dynamics future. I'm Jason Gumpert, and joining us today we have David Long, Director of Portals and Collaboration for Tribridge. David is an expert in a variety of Microsoft technologies and has worked with Microsoft SharePoint since its early beta days in 2001. He is here today to present to us on the topic of extending reporting workflows, content, and customer service from Dynamics ERP and CRM. So as we get started, I just want to add that we welcome your questions and comments throughout the presentation. We recommend using the chat and the Q&A block that you will see on the right side of the screen to enter your thoughts and questions during the presentation. So without further delay, please allow me to welcome today's speaker, David Long.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So let's jump right into it. Just a couple of background slides on who I am and who Tribridge is. Tribridge is Microsoft Dynamics implementer partner. We've been the actual worldwide partner of the year 4 of the last 6 years, and have got a ton of customers, and we work in all of the Dynamics technologies, so CRM, AX, NAV, GPSL. So enough of that. We'll move on. But we're obviously a big Dynamics partner, but we've actually been doing SharePoint longer than we've been doing Dynamics, and we've done quite a bit of different things. So just about any way you could use SharePoint, we've done that. And a lot of what I'm going to show you today is things that we have, developed over time, or things we've done for certain customers. So we'll jump right into that. So today, what we're going to talk about are pretty simple. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of SharePoint, just in case there are a few of you out there who still don't know what it is and what it can do. And then we're going to talk about why you would want to integrate Dynamics with SharePoint, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you a bunch of different ways that you can do that integration. What I will do, because there are some different flavors of SharePoint, I've got for each one of these techniques that I'm going to show you, I've got what the software that's required both from a SharePoint, what the minimum version of SharePoint is, as well as any other products that you may need. Some of them will have some third-party tools in there, and we'll talk about those when I get to them. And then I think we're going to have time. I'll jump out and do a demo of a couple of things for you, just to show you kind of how you would go about doing some of these things. And by all means, Q&A, fire them at me whenever you're ready through the chat window. And I will either answer them at the end, or if I notice it and it's relevant, I'll address it immediately. Yeah, that's me. So, SharePoint. It's literally a lump of clay you can do a lot of different things with. But a few points about it. It has been the fastest growing product in Microsoft history. I like to refer to it, and my team really talks about it in terms of communications and collaboration. Anytime you're getting together and working with somebody on anything, it could be a document, it could be a project, it could be any number of things. Most people who don't embrace SharePoint will probably fall back to email, which frankly is, I consider it the enemy of collaboration. If you think about it, you send a document to some people via email and ask them for some feedback, and guess what? You'll get back multiple varieties of that email or that document, and it just really makes things inefficient. If you're sharing information or asking questions via email, the people on the distribution list are the only ones who will ever benefit from it. So a lot of things get locked away in our inboxes that really would benefit either other people in the organization, or even people we hire tomorrow, next week, next year. They'll never have a chance of seeing that. So it really is about that collaborative process within organizations. Steve Ballmer actually called it a business operating system, which which is a pretty good description. It can really help. At Tribridge, it is really the centerpiece of all that we do around the work that we deliver. Everybody touches it every day. So all that said, it is still an 80% solution. It is like that Swiss Army knife that can do a ton of different things pretty well, but it may not do it as well as you need it to do, right? So, you know, it is that utility tool. You know, if you think about your ERP system or your CRM system, those are specialty tools that are designed to service the needs of specific groups, and I'll touch on this more in the next slide. But SharePoint, you know, you're not, you know, it has a knife, but you're not going to do surgery with that knife, right? You're going to go get a specialty tool to do that, and that's your ERP system, right? There are lots of things it does that sometimes you may need a third-party product to layer on, and that's no different than your Dynamics products, your CRM. They all have an ecosystem of ISVs out there that are adding to the product to really round out its capabilities. So this slide just is an example of, you know, how does SharePoint fit in as an enterprise application, right? So I talked about those specialty tools, right? You might have a Dynamics ERP system, a CRM system. You might have systems to address a lot of different people in the organization. But there are other users and other processes that may have a need to interact with those systems, or they might have their own needs outside of those systems. And again, that's where, you know, do we want to go to Home Depot every weekend and buy a new specialty tool to address the one thing that I'm going to do this weekend, and then I'm going to put it in the garage and never use it again? Or do I want to get a utility tool that can do lots of different things? And that's really how SharePoint kind of fills in the gaps and acts as that sort of utility tool across a lot of different things. And so being able to interact with these other systems is important to further add to its utility. So SharePoint, we typically talk about, we call this the SharePoint pie, and the main sort of areas of functionality that kind of go on in there, whether it's sites, content, search, building communities, insights, and solutions. I think we're going to touch a little bit on all those today, but you know, it is a big hairy monster that can do lots of things for you. One thing I do like to point out, you know, SharePoint is a big part of Microsoft's play in a lot of areas, and if you look at Gartner, you know, whether it's social, business intelligence, portals and collaboration, or enterprise content management, SharePoint is the foundation on which all of these solutions are built. So it is a leader across a lot of things in spite of being that sort of Swiss Army knife tool. So why would we want to integrate SharePoint in our dynamic systems? You know, and hopefully some of you have already started to do that or are thinking about doing it. But in terms of streamlining business processes, again, we can leverage SharePoint to extend and do a lot of different things to help our processes, right? Whether it's you know, a purchase request, right? That doesn't have to start out in the ERP system. It can start out as a request through SharePoint, and once it goes through the approval process, it then gets created in the ERP system, right? Let's not bother our accounting system until it's time to take some action. It's a great place to surface data to different team members or executives. SharePoint is, again, referring back to that Gartner Magic Quadrant, SharePoint on top of SQL Server is one of the leaders in the business intelligence discipline. And so I'll have some screenshots or some things that will show you kind of the power of that. Another thing is, you know, we don't necessarily want everybody to be in the accounting system. You know, I'm a practice director here. I have some needs to interface with the accounting system, but I really don't, you know, I don't like going there because it's just not, it's not what I do. But I do need information from it, and I need to have some interactivity with it. So, you know, let's let the accountants work in the accounting system, and let's use SharePoint to surface that other information that we don't necessarily need to always go back there for. That also goes hand in hand with saving on your licensing costs. A CAL for an ERP system is typically a fairly expensive thing. SharePoint, much less expensive. So, and typically we've already paid for that for the entire organization anyway. Enhancing system functionality. There may be things that don't quite work the way we want them to in our accounting system. We might be able to deliver that functionality through SharePoint, still integrated with those systems. Advanced visualizations, again, the BI stuff, and then integrating your accounting data with non-accounting data. Right? We may actually want to tie together ERP data with CRM data, with HRIS data, or the documents that are supporting all that. So again, SharePoint, I like to call it the glue that kind of binds a lot of different things together. Nope, it's not time for Q&A yet. Let me so let's look at some examples of how we can integrate SharePoint with our dynamic system. So the first and most obvious one that we see are the examples of our dynamic systems, our Dynamics ERP systems all have some integration with SharePoint. SL has Business Portal, GP has Business Portal, AX has Enterprise Portal, and NAV has been the last one to join the game, and it's not Enterprise Portal. I can't remember the name of it, but it's another portal. It's the portal framework. So each of them has something that's out there that does some integration. They widely vary in what their capabilities are. This is actually a screenshot of a Dynamics GP project center. So to implement something like this, you obviously need the minimum you need is SharePoint Foundation, and then you need your Dynamics portal software. Again, that may vary depending on which ERP system you have. Business connectivity services. So this will work with SharePoint Foundation, although as you move up to Enterprise Edition, there's some more capabilities around that. You do need SharePoint Designer to implement things with BCS. That is a free download from Microsoft. There's all sorts of trouble you can get into with SharePoint Designer, but one of them is to create what are called external lists, where we can connect to our ERP system and either a table, a SQL statement, a view, any number of those things we can connect. We can actually enable full what we call CRUD capabilities: create, read, update, delete. If your system supports that, I would always recommend caution before I am writing back, and make sure you do a lot of testing. This screen you're seeing here is just the configuration screen inside of SharePoint Designer. Once you have that connection, you can now have a list that displays that information. Again, so once you've created that connection, you can now surface that information in SharePoint fairly easily. SQL reporting services. So every ERP and CRM system all have some reporting capabilities around them. Many of them are using SSRS. Reporting services will actually run in what's called SharePoint integrated mode. You've got to have SharePoint Foundation. So again, you can use what's called the free version of SharePoint or better, and then obviously you need SQL Server. And you know, it's nice to put it in SharePoint because again, this is the collaborative platform that people should be working with for content and other things. So being able to deliver these reports, again, it may be connecting to multiple different systems, right? You know, the people who are working in the accounting system all day or working in the CRM system all day are going to use the reports that are integrated into that system. This is really going to target people who are not that frequent user of those other systems. Excel Services is another capability. This requires SharePoint Enterprise Edition, and obviously you have to have Excel. And so now you can create pretty rich reports. You can do pivot tables, pivot charts, give some interactivity. Up here in the top left corner, you see what are called slicers that were introduced, where I can pick which ones that I want the rest of these charts and graphs to show, and I can easily work with that right away. The nice thing about Excel Services is I can, people are fairly used to building these types of reports in Excel, so I can have the accountant or whoever is working with this data build the report using a data connection that's connecting to our data source, and once they're ready, they can now publish this to SharePoint as a web page that has all that interactivity with it. And when I do that publishing, I can choose exactly what pieces of that Excel spreadsheet that I want to make available for publishing. I may have a bunch of raw data. I may have some formulas that I don't necessarily want to put out there, and so I can publish just the results of that, and I'll show you that in the demo a little bit later. Visio Service is another great tool that we have to visualize information that's coming from our back office systems. Whether it is process flows or org charts that you've tied, you could create a whole sort of sales organization org chart where you're tying the business data to the shapes, and you'll notice the shapes can change based on the underlying data. So in this case, I've got this truck is showing red. That's obviously a bottleneck in my process here, and I can actually click on that to see the underlying supporting data, again, coming right out of our ERP system. You can see we can also do sales types of charts. Here I can see the information around sales, and I can see Washington State is below target. I can drill into that and further look at again, a visual representation with Visio over here. But over here, I've got Excel Services working in conjunction with it to show data in a graph. You can also do, again, process flows. Anything you can do in Visio, you can now start to visualize in a web page within SharePoint. Again, this requires the Enterprise Edition of SharePoint, and obviously you need Visio to build these charts. PowerView is a fairly new capability. You will create these in Excel. It does require SQL Server Analysis Services. So what does that mean? That means we need to build cubes of data that allow us to do this dimensional modeling and analysis. This is really powerful stuff. This is actually a little video that I'll play for you so you can kind of see how it works, right? So this is a portfolio of different Excel charts and reports that are tied to this data. And so you can see it's fairly interactive, right? I can start to click on different series. I can expand different parts of the screen. If I want to, I can come in and do some advanced filtering. So you can see here I can do the checkbox type filtering, or with dollar amounts I've got a slider capability, and the charts all update automatically. The chart actually, again, has multiple pages to it. So if I want to, I'm done with this one, I can go and bring up one of the other ones. So you can see we have a couple other ones. In this case, this one is actually playing data over time. So you can see as that timeline starts moving, we can see the effect of the bottom chart on the top one. And then I can actually go in and do some more detailed analysis. I can pick the actual series that I'm interested in and see just those playback over that time period as well. So pretty neat way to visualize your data. Lots of power in how you can kind of do this analysis. You also have the ability to integrate with maps. So we can take that data that comes from our ERP system, put it in this warehouse, and then start to visualize it. And you can see we've got some filtering capabilities up here at the top. We've got some sales information on the left. That's all tied to each of these push pins. So as I click on a push pin, I'm going to see the associated data to that store. And again, I've got full interactivity with this map. I can zoom in, zoom out, pan, all of that stuff. The next one is really, it's my favorite one. I've talked at a few I've talked at Convergence and some of the Dynamics user groups, and this product far and away is the most popular way to do some integration with your ERP or CRM system. It's called the Business Data List Connector, and it will work with SharePoint Foundation. It's a fairly inexpensive product. It runs about, I think it's about $1,200 for the server. It will work any version of SharePoint, including SharePoint Online if you're in that area. And what this does is it allows you to take data from a data source. It could be a SQL Server, Oracle, it's really any data source. You can even pull from other SharePoint sources. And it essentially synchronizes that with a SharePoint list. And so this is the configuration page for this. We don't really need to spend much time because I'm going to build one of these for you. But the power of doing that over the BCS stuff that we saw earlier is I can now take data from another system and add additional columns, trigger workflows, notifications, all sorts of different capabilities around there. And again, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail when we get into the demo. Next area is around integrating with CRM. Being able to, in this case, we're filtering content with CRM. This only requires SharePoint Standard Edition as well as CRM and Visual Studio. What we've got here is an organization that's using this to manage the documentation around the different types of work they're doing. So they've got different libraries that are associated with different accounts and then the buildings within those accounts. And so these drop downs here and job number are custom SharePoint filters that are actually looking back at CRM and pulling that data in. So I can now come back and say, I want to see it, this building and this account and this job number. I can see all of those documents that are related to that specific activity. So again, we've got CRM data supporting what we're doing in SharePoint. Now, CRM also offers, I mentioned all of the ERP integrations. CRM offers what we call an out-of-the-box integration with SharePoint that allows you to really store documents associated with any entity inside of CRM. And that works pretty well. There are some things to keep in mind if you're going to use it around how you architect it, as well as whether you're going to have users actually accessing this content outside of the context of CRM. There are some cases where you would probably not want to use that, but a more custom version that provides a little bit more flexibility. Another example of surfacing CRM data, in this case, this is an example of a partner portal that was created that provided access to marketing materials and tools, training, but they actually surfaced opportunity information that was associated with that particular partner right through SharePoint. So rather than exposing CRM to the outside, we just surfaced it right through SharePoint. It was an interface they're already using for other things, and so now they can come in here and manage their opportunities directly with their partners. Again, Enterprise Edition for this, CRM, and Visual Studio to do some of those integrations. Infopath is another powerful capability of SharePoint. In this case, we have built a solution that allowed this organization to interact with CRM for lookup information, for other things, and in this case, they're requesting diagnostic services. And so it's very easy to interact with other systems using web services with Infopath. In this case, they would come in and check off the things they want to do. They'd hit continue, and then the form would change and render the appropriate fields based on what they had input, And of course, it also does advanced validations as well as presenting the right information to the user based on what their role in that whole process is. So again, this is an enterprise required feature for Infopath form services. And again, this has CRM, Infopath, and I think we even use a little Visual Studio on this. Document imaging can come into play with a lot of the Dynamics products. Absolutely, with ERP systems, we have the need to do imaging, whether it's AP, AR we've seen, HR has needs around it, CRM might have some needs around it, and so there are a bunch of solutions out there that can provide that sort of integration, and we have partnerships with a few of them. The one that if you have SharePoint and are using SharePoint, from our standpoint, Knowledge Lake is probably the best fit because most of the other systems don't use SharePoint to store documents. Well, what does SharePoint do? It's a document storage system. So why would we go out and buy another solution to do document storage and workflow when we already have that tool? So Knowledge Lake adds some capabilities to allow it to really interact with your ERP system, your CRM system, or really any other systems. So whether you are in your Outlook, you're scanning things in, or you're in your native application, right? Whether it's an ERP or CRM, it is integrated to do that. In this case, we're looking at the email system where you may receive an invoice here. You can actually index the documents and send them into SharePoint. It'll tag them with the right data out of your ERP system and release them into SharePoint for storage, so they're associated with it. This is an example of a CRM integration. This is one of the capabilities called Unify that actually adds this into CRM and ERP systems. Really, any system allows you to have that interactivity with your images or your documents without leaving the application you're in. So in this case, I might be retrieving invoices related to this contact or this account. I can scan a new contact. I might pull up AP documents. Again, I can configure these actions for the screen that I'm on, right? So in this case, for a contact screen, these are the actions we want available. So again, obviously in your ERP system, you're going to have different actions available based on what module you're actually in. So again, very powerful way to tie SharePoint to your dynamic systems and allow that imaging to be taken care of. So again, SharePoint Foundation is your minimum there. And then again, this will be Knowledge Lake, or again, there's other products out there that might make sense for you as well. All right, so now I want to show you just a quick demo of a couple of ways that we can do some integration. So I'm going to bring up this is just a blank BI Center site, which would be a great place to display business intelligence and other types of reports. And so the first thing I want to do is let's create an Excel services page and publish it to show accounts receivable information. And just as a side note, accounts receivable is what drove me to really kind of explore all these solutions in the first place. Our accounting team, using the tool they had, was the weekly accounts receivable report that they would send out to a good chunk of the organization. And over time, my practice here is just one small part of a much larger organization, and I really didn't care to see everybody else's accounts receivable or page through this document to find my stuff. Why can't you just send me my stuff? So I was granted access to our accounting system database to be able to build this, and so I started with Excel services as a way I wanted to do that. So I'm going to build one of these for you fairly quickly using our Dynamics ERP system. So the first thing I need to do is get my external data. So I come in here and I can say, we'll just use the data connection wizard, and I'm going to do SQL Server, give it the server name, and I'm going to use a SQL account. Now, obviously, you need to know what your query is that's going to give you the data that you want to. So I'm going to go through here and finish this. And so now I've reached the point where I want to say what it is that I'm going to add to this. And so first I need to go to the properties, and here's where I can set up a few of the items in terms of the refresh. I can do background refresh. I can refresh when opening the file, but I also want to update the definition. Right now it's just saying I'm going to pull back a table. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give it a SQL statement to give me exactly what I want to, and I'm not going to write that for you. I've pasted that in. From an authentication standpoint, we're going to do none. And I should be ready to go out and pull in that data. So here is accounts receivable data that's come in from the system. And now I can insert, we'll do a pivot chart and a pivot table. So we've selected that range. We'll put it in a new worksheet. And so here I have my chart and my table. So now I can start to build this thing out. And so in terms of filters, I will want to probably filter by practice and maybe by, I don't know, by office. And then what kind of data do I want? I want the project ID. I want the invoice number. And I want the balance. And maybe even I want the days overdue. And actually, days overdue, we'll probably want to do the average. And so now you can see my chart. I've got the interactivity where I can narrow it down to a specific location. And practice, I can come in here and narrow it down to a specific practice, right? This could be by customers, by products, however you want to. I've got my chart here, and I've got my table over here. So now I'm ready to publish this thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a save as, and I'm going to save it to the document library in SharePoint, and we'll call this AR analysis. And this is the important point right here. When I am doing this, I need to hit the browser view options. And here's where I can tell it what pieces I want to make available. So right now, the entire workbook's available. But maybe I don't want people to be looking at the raw data behind it. So I can come in here and say, I want specific items in this workbook. Right? So I don't want that query, but I do want the pivot table, and I do want chart 1. So I say OK to that. I save it. And now it will be available for me to drop on a page. Let me minimize that and come back here. And I've set up an accounts receivable analysis page. This is just a blank page right now. And so I want to edit this thing and drop on those web parts. So here you can see I've got some unstructured page content, and then I've got traditional what are called web part zones. And so if I'm going to drop a web part here, you'll see up here I've got all of the different types. And so I want to look at business data, and here you can see Excel Web Access. So I'm going to go ahead and add that one. And I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to add a second one over here. So now I have two web parts that need to be configured. So I've got to open the tool pane, and I have to select the workbook. And this one actually allows you to browse. No, not that one. I need to go to Documents and AR Analysis. And then I have to tell it what item do I want. Now, unfortunately, I can't do the same thing here and browse to it. So I have to remember what the names are of the items I want to. So I'm going to do Pivot Table 1, I believe. And there are a bunch of settings about, how it's going to be titled, what type of toolbar you want, toolbar commands you want to make available. So let me apply that and see if I spelled it right. Okay, so there's my pivot chart. Now let's open this one, and we'll put our, that's our pivot table, and now we're going to put in our pivot chart as well. And let's see, that was chart 1, I believe. See how that one looks. All right, so now we can save this, and we've got our two items on the page. Again, we can lay this out how we want to. We can build this chart, but every time I come back to this page, it's pulling live data. Again, I've got the full interactivity here. I come in here and just look at New York City and get data for that, or I can look at practices, or both. So again, fairly easy way to get that data out there and accessible to your users without having to send them a spreadsheet every month or every week, or however you do that interactivity. So let's go and go back to that business data list connector, and I'll show you how we've worked with that. So again, just to remind you, that actually synchronizes with a SharePoint list. So another example that I'm going to show you is to create an invoice approval process. So one thing that we noted about how our accounting system did invoice approvals, different people, non-accountants, we task with approving invoices related to the projects that they're working on. So they would get the notification that they have an invoice to approve, but that was it. They'd get that one notification, and then that would be it. And we're all busy people, and sometimes we forget, and there's no reminders. And so we were having a difficult time getting the invoices approved in a timely manner. So we used this tool to take advantage of the SharePoint workflow capabilities to where we sent them that initial notification, and then a reminder copying their supervisor if they didn't do it within a timely manner, and all the while keeping accounting up to date on where it was. And I'll show you a couple little more things about this in a minute here. So let's see how we connect this. So you start, in this case, it's just a blank custom list. The only field we have in here is a title. So we need to get this connected to our accounting system to pull this data in. But before I do that, I'm actually going to create one more column before I do this, and I'm going to call it Approver. I'm going to spell it right, though. Approver, and that we're going to select as the field type of a person or group. And this is a special field because it's linked to the Active Directory account of the user. And so when we bring that in, we're now going to know who the approver actually is, and we can send them emails, we can do workflow around them, we can look up who their supervisor is. So we need to set that up in advance, and then once we bring the data in, it will automatically populate. So I've I've added that, but I'm not going to add any other fields. So now I can come into the list settings, and it adds a choice here called Connect to External Data Source. And so your first step is to pick what the provider is. And here you can see ODBC, OLADB, Oracle, SQL, or even a SharePoint list. So I'm going to pick SQL, and I'm just going to do a connection string here. I can validate it. You can use the secure store service with SharePoint to basically keep the connection information private. Then I can put in my SQL statement. I can validate that. It looks good. If I want to, I can preview it. Now, the important thing to do here is to make sure you have a primary key associated with this query, so when there are updates to it, it will only update the fields. If you don't have a primary key, it won't have any way of knowing what row belongs to what row, and it will basically delete everything and re-add it every time it synchronizes. So my validation of that was successful. And so now all I have to do is say add columns. And it's going to go out and update the list and create all the columns that match what that query is. And I can come over here and check the mappings. And here you can see where they all lined up. And you can see my approver is now associated with approver, and it is a person or group. If I did not put that in there beforehand, it would think it was just a single line of text. So again, you can see we've got dates, numbers, and we can modify these a little bit if we need to. So the mappings look good, and now I can click Update. The other thing I can do right here is check this box. This is what does the synchronization. If I check that off, it will update or synchronize that data every 15 minutes, or you can actually change that refresh frequency. I think 15 minutes is the shortest time span you can do it, but some larger, less changing lists you might want to do less frequently. You can have write back if the data source supports it. Obviously, you cannot do write back against a query, but if you're pulling in just a table, you could do that. So I can click Update, and it's going to go out and pull in that information, and hopefully there's not a lot of invoices out there that are still requiring approval. So there we go. Oh, there are 300 and some. So if I say OK now, and I can come back to my open invoice list, and here they all are, including who the approver is. So I've got all that information. Now, this isn't very organized. I may want to present this in a different way, right? I may want it sorted by the approver or some other thing. So I'm actually going to come in here, and I'm going to add one more column. We have our work organized by practice. So I'm going to put in a column for practice, and that's actually going to end up being a calculated column. And so I can write a formula that will take our practice is actually embedded in the project ID, so I can use that. And so now we've got that column. If I go over here to the right, there's our three-character practice code. And now I can change this view to be a little bit more, make a little bit more sense. So when I edit the view, I'll come down here to the Group By section and say, let's group this by practice. Say OK, and now instantly I can see, I can go in and drill in on explicitly what my invoices are that are required to be approved. So I come in here, and fortunately none of my invoices are still requiring approval, but some other people's are. So now I can create that workflow, right? So when a new invoice shows up here, it automatically triggers a notification to the person who's responsible to approve it, and then it waits for a couple of days, checks to see if it's still there. If it is, sends that reminder. So lots of ways you can do that sort of integration. This tool, very handy to kind of extend. We actually replaced, so I showed you doing Excel services to display accounts receivable. We actually replaced that with this tool to pull that in, because we were able to add additional columns to that data. And so we added an assigned to column, which was a person. So if we wanted one person in particular to be responsible for trying to collect on the accounts receivable, they would get assigned that account, get notified. But then we'd also add a notes column, which in SharePoint you can have set up as a running sort of notes field where every time there's an entry, it will put a date stamp. And so you know who did it, when they did it, and you can kind of keep track of the entire history of the effort to collect that information. One other thing that we've been able to do with this, a reason to add another column, you know, in certain types of reports, right? When we send out reports, financial reports or other types of reports, sometimes the data isn't always perfect, not necessarily clean. There might be information around elements of that report that you just kind of sometimes wish, oh, I don't need to worry about that one, right? That doesn't apply, or you know, you just need to. You wish you could kind of modify the report to filter out some of these things. Well, rather than go back and change the underlying data or change the accounting system, we can easily add columns in here to flag things, you know, based on whether they're relevant or not, right? It could be a simple yes/no as to include into the report. So, you know, to do something like that, I could simply add a column called include and make it a yes/no, and we'll default it to yes. And let me modify this view, and I'll actually put the include as one of the fields up front. So there it is. And what I can do in SharePoint is actually go into what's called Datasheet View. And so now this is just like a spreadsheet. I can come in here and check off these yes/nos. I can actually copy. Actually, I can just drag this all the way down like it's Excel. All right, we don't have to include them all. And now I can get out of this view, and you'll see that. And now I can create a special view, and I can base it off of that one, or I can just start from scratch. But I won't include that column, and we'll just call it active. And I can come down here to my filter, and now say where include is equal to yes. Save it, and now you can see my list has gone way down. Although all the other fields are, all the other records are still there, I can come back here and see all of them. But I could make this my default view, and then when somebody wants to update it and say, you know what, that record we know is there, but we just don't want it to show up in this view because it's kind of impacting the overall picture, you can modify it, the record to say no, and it'll disappear. So those are some examples of how you can do that. Let me jump back over here. No, wrong one. There we go. All right, so we are at the Q&A portion. I've hopefully haven't missed too many. But we'll open that up for Q&A now.
All right, thanks, David. There have been a few questions about access to the slides, and if you have a contact slide, we can put that up in a little while maybe, and people can request those. We are also recording the session. Okay, great. So there we go, and you can request the slides if you'd like. We are recording the session. We'll make that available on MS Dynamics World as well. So look for a notification on that fairly soon. And yeah, we invite you to enter your questions now. Are there scenarios that you're considering bringing in SharePoint to augment your Dynamics ERP or Dynamics CRM solution that maybe Dave could give some feedback on, or other scenarios that you're interested in? David, we do have a couple questions that have come in so far. How do you secure connection strings with the BDLC tool?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned that. In the past, it didn't support it, but they've recently added the capability to leverage what's called the Secure Service. So in SharePoint, it's a service application that allows you to define these connections to different, enterprise systems, where you can define, you can put in the username and password, and then secure who has access to that connection, right? So who is allowed to use this connection. So that's typically how you're going to set that up. Otherwise, you can also do user-level permissions, where you would need to basically secure the data based on the username, and I know CRM supports that really more than the ERP systems. But in that case, you typically need Kerberos authentication configured, which some people struggle with, although it really isn't too difficult. But being able to pass those credentials all the way through would be the other way to keep things secure.
All right. Another question. I know you touched on this, but can you write data back to the source system, and can you maybe talk about some of the details that go into making that possible?
Sure. So there are a couple of different ways. You didn't mention if it was specific to any particular product, but I'll start with BDLC, since that was what we were just talking about. That does support write back if the data connection provider you're using supports it. So we've used that to update tables, like lookup tables and things where we can connect directly to a table. Most systems are fairly relational and have some connections, between tables, some relationships. And anytime you're using anything more than a table, you're really not going to be able to do that write back, because it can't handle that. Same for business connectivity services. Again, if you are connecting to a table, you can have write back enabled for that. Otherwise, if you want to collect information, whether it's in SharePoint, like as in a list, or an Infopath form that you want to then push into your Dynamics system, you're really going to want to look at leveraging the web services. And they all have them now. I think SL is really starting to roll some web services out. So that would be the way I would connect and do write-backs.
All right, great. Another question that came in here that you may be seeing, we use Office 365 and Dynamics CRM Online. How easy, we can maybe get into the versions if need be, how easy or hard is it to import Dynamics CRM Online data into SharePoint Online's lists? And can the connection support CRUD? Also, what about accessing on-site SQL from SharePoint Online?
So SharePoint Online does support some limited BCS capabilities. They are working hard to enhance and extend that. I'm sure their goal is to get to complete feature parity with on-premise. There will always be some things they can't do, but the best tool in that regard right now, I think, is the BDLC tool. The company's Layer 2. They have a cloud connector that will do that synchronization up to the cloud. It requires an install in an on-premise location. So if you're going from CRM Online to SharePoint Online, it can connect to both of those and kind of facilitate that transfer and synchronization. So it's possible. It's a little bit more difficult, but certainly possible.
All right. One person asks here, how is this related to the GP workflow process, which is essentially using SharePoint workflow, but it's very limited in selecting criteria, especially based on previous values of certain fields. So how is this related to the GP workflow process?
Yeah, so, and I don't know if you've heard, but the GP workflow is actually going to, I guess, get divorced from the SharePoint workflow here pretty soon. So really, I really don't try and mess with the GP workflow. So I tend to try and split the two. If there's something that needs that's going to impact GP at some point, but it doesn't necessarily start in GP, right? So it's not like an invoice approval or a purchase requisition. I don't necessarily start it with the GP workflow, but it might be a SharePoint workflow and eventually end up pushing something into GP. But in general, I'd say they're not really going to be related. And again, future, it won't be related at all.
All right, a question here from Rich, who's using AX 2009 and SharePoint 2010 Foundation, and they're looking at the Nintex product for extending SharePoint workflow services and integrating into AX data. Do you have any experience with that?
Oh, Nintex. That is my absolute favorite tool to use with SharePoint. Nintex, I'm an out-of-the-box kind of guy. So because SharePoint has workflow in the box, I always leaned on that. And at some point a few years back, one of my customers said, look, and I always knew about Nintex, and there are a few other workflow tools out there, and liked it, but I just said, why am I going to buy this? Yeah, it's neat, and it seems to do some cool stuff. And then one of my customers said, I'm buying it, and I want you to be the partner to support me with it, so go partner with them and do it. And so we got to start to get familiar with it, and we got to use it internally, and we went from having maybe 10 different workflows running internally to well over 100 now. I mean, it is so easy to sit down and use the designer, and I mean, I've built some pretty cool things with it. New hire processing, you can actually, goes all the way through creating the account in Active Directory, so I could not recommend it more highly.
All right, great. We have really more of a comment here, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it from Tim, who writes that some of the things that you were demonstrating really help SharePoint help sell SharePoint to C-level executives. The newer BI functionality is really impressive, and what's your sense on that as a director at Tribridge? Are you seeing that some of the new technology is in fact helping to move conversations along?
It is. They've worked hard. They've certainly stumbled along the way with BI, and I think the Power View, which is what the video, the media file that I showed you was, that's all that BI stuff is really sexy stuff, and that's what executives want. I mean, that's the information they're begging to see. So, and again, there are lots of BI tools out there, and there are a bunch that are really focused on specific dynamic solutions. But I mean, short of budgeting, I don't think Microsoft has really got a budgeting sort of solution. But in terms of reporting across the enterprise, tying in multiple different systems, it's phenomenal. We've seen the BI, just the BI portion of what we're doing with SharePoint just explode this year with the advent of the Power View and the 2013 capabilities with SQL 2012 also adds a lot of power. So yeah, that's a definite, that's C-level eye candy there.
All right, excellent. We are really at the top of the hour here. We did have one last question. I'm not sure if it's something that you can really answer, but so related to the GP workflow question, does it make sense to consider going to a pure SharePoint workflow that pushes approvals to GP, looking to the future and given the direction that particular product is headed?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I don't really know what to expect from the future of GP workflow. It may be the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know. I think where I wouldn't invest a lot is on the existing GP workflow because if that, I mean, I'm sure there will be some period of time where they deprecate it but still support it. But you know, honestly, I'd probably say it's a wait and see at this point. If you've already got something in place, continue to use it. You know, if you have to do something, then I would consider SharePoint as the platform to do it on, because we know that's not going to change. And that will at least allow you to implement something you know is a little bit future-proof compared to the GP stuff.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for your time today. Great stuff, and really appreciate all the time you took to answer those questions.
Sure.
And thanks to everyone in the audience. Again, great questions today. Really appreciate your taking the time to be with us, and please stay tuned for upcoming sessions. We'll definitely be letting you know about them. So thanks again, and have a great day.